Welcome to VbIM for practitioners. My name is Roy Childs and I'm the author of a number of psychometric tools, and this video is to help people to explore their values, something that is fundamental to our sense of identity. You may be viewing this for your own use, or because you intend to facilitate this process with others. Either way, it will help you to understand what values are, why they are important, and how to use the VbIM questionnaire. The VbIM itself breaks new ground by proposing a coherent structure for exploring values and by using innovative psychometric methods which translate a person's self-report into a personal challenge that gets beyond the superficial articulation of socially desirable concepts. The structure of this video will follow 5 key steps as follows. Why are values important? We need to understand how and why values are so fundamental to a person's sense of identity. What values are? How can we identify them, given the plethora of words that are used to describe them? How would you introduce VbIM? I would like to share some ideas that prepare people for the journey they are being invited to take. And then how to review VbIM results. I will suggest ways I have found that help people to understand what comes out of the questionnaire. And finally, why VbIM itself is a useful tool and how it fills a big gap in what tools are currently available. The importance of values can be seen in many classic works of literature. Both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were mentally tortured because they could not reconcile what they did with their underlying values. Ambition drove their behaviour, but they subsequently paid for it very dearly. And similarly, Raskolnikov in Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. He justifies his murderous actions logically, but this does not help him in the end, and the tension between his cognitive justification and his underlying sense of morality proved too big to reconcile. Another illustration is people suffering from PTSD. It is not always what they saw, but what they saw in themselves that causes the trauma. They are trying to reconcile who they thought they were with who they saw inside themselves in those moments. So our values speak from a deeper part of ourselves. They represent who we are or would like to be. They underpin our sense of true identity. And the more our lives, our behaviours, our transitory joys transgress this notion, the more our lives feel unsatisfactory, empty, and purposeless. So let me illustrate how values guide us when we make decisions. And let me start with something relatively trivial. Imagine buying a car. You choose one that is the right colour, shape, comfort, etc., and decide to buy it. But after the purchase, you discover that the fuel economy is poor, and you conclude that you've made a bad decision. Why? Because the wrong values were guiding you. Your values were upside down. So knowing what is most important to you allows you to make judgments about what is good, desirable, worthwhile, and that leads to better, or at least personally satisfying decisions. So now let me turn to something more fundamental than buying a car. Going back to Raskolnikov's decision to murder the pawnbroker, which by his logic was ridding the world of a worthless human being, plus it made it possible for him to fund his law degree, in which he could use then to benefit mankind, all very rational, so why couldn't he live with it? It was because he made a decision which ignored his deeper moral values, that human life is always important. Making important decisions that we can live with need a yardstick by which to judge them, to judge whether they are good, whether they are desirable, or whether they are worthwhile. To do this well, we need to understand our real values. They should guide us or motivate us, but too often we are not fully conscious, as in Raskolnikov's case. And clashes between our actions and our values can create deep dissonance, which leads to a lack of satisfaction, to put it mildly. We may then try to resolve things by changing our value system in order to justify our actions, but this is not easy. Sometimes we resolve such dissonance by doing penance of some kind. But on a more positive note, if we are clearer about our values, we have better yardsticks for making choices such as careers, leisure activities, people and relationships, all of which help us to find purpose and to make meaning in our lives. To summarize, we can think of values metaphorically as the things that explain the what and the why of a sailing ship. Why are you on this ship? One reason is you want to go somewhere, but where? Values give you direction. They help you with your longer-term purpose by setting a course. However, they also help with the shorter term. You value the sense of freedom. You're exhilarated by the wind on your face and the expansive horizon. You enjoy the physicality of being in nature. In other words, your values both guide you in the moment and provide direction as you sail through this life. They are the why you do what you do. Introducing VbIM is often best done by asking a simple question such as, what makes you get out of bed in the morning? Hopefully, it's no longer your mum. However, people often find it hard to articulate, certainly to articulate what makes them get up or could make them get up feeling energized. You're trying to find what gives or could give people passion, energy, and purpose. And unfortunately, people often find this quite hard and often respond with words that are rather superficial or socially desirable. Now, there are several ways to explore what could give real passion, purpose, and energy. So let's explore that. One way is to encourage deeper reflection with a series of questions. I will show these to you, and you can pause the video and take some time to reflect while writing down your own thoughts for each of these prompts. The exercise you have just done can be very effective, but however, you may want another way to help people to identify values. So once again, I'm going to give you a series of prompts and you can pause the video while you try them out. The last two exercises attempted to identify values using a person's own language, but that is often quite vague. They use words such as family. But what is it that's so important about the family? It can be many different things. For example, it could be inclusion, which means it gives a sense of belonging to something, of having roots. Or it could be the place where there is connection, where you can connect and have more intimate contact with people. Sometimes it's the fact that there is a chance for having people around with whom you can collaborate and do things together. And sometimes it is satisfied as a kind of contact, a social contact need. So you can see there are very many different reasons why people might say family. And it shows the complexity involved in really trying to understand values and motives. This is why a model of values can be helpful. It provides people with, ideas that are hard to articulate, and it can sharpen their definitions of what they mean and what is really important. The VbIM model of values was developed because published values questionnaires that I reviewed and used did not cover values that were important to people in the 21st century. And most surprisingly, they have an enormous black hole. Psychologists generally recognize the importance of other people, of relationships, in mental health, in general well-being and motivation. However, the relational space is poorly represented in values questionnaires, often represented by a single scale. VbIM has 5 different scales to define relational values. Some people can find it hard to use their own language to describe their values. It's a bit like asking someone what they want to eat. If they can't think, but you present them with a menu, they may sometimes quickly see things they'd never thought of. The analogy is to give people something like a menu, in this case a set of cards. And this is an example of one of the 24 cards which represent the VbIM values and are available from Team Focus. You ask people to sort through the cards which act as stimulus to find the ones that resonate. But we all know that labels can be interpreted differently by different people, and so they can be flipped over, and this gives them a little more definition about what that actual value really means. To understand the VbIM model, we can begin with the two dimensions that emerge during the research and development phase. The first of these is the degree to which the values are focused on the individual or on the group. And the second of these is the degree to which the values are about short-term satisfaction or longer-term meaning. These dimensions provide a useful four-box model which can be used to organize a wide range of different values. For example, one questionnaire has a value called hedonism. This can clearly be identified as a short-term and individual value, and so would fit in the top left-hand box. Another from the same questionnaire is career progression. Where do you think that would sit? It sits neatly in a personal, individual, but longer term category, which is box 2 here. Similarly, from the same questionnaire, we have a value called affiliation. Where would that sit? It is clearly something to do with groups, and it is also usually something to do with short-term satisfaction, and so we put it here. And finally, what about the word altruism? This clearly is a longer-term, group-orientated value. And so you might like to pause this video now and try placing the values that you identified earlier into whichever of the four boxes that you see here. But meanwhile, I will continue and describe these a little bit more. So if we look at box 1, we can see that it is to do with what I want for myself, personal satisfaction, whereas box 2 is what I want to become, personal development. In box 3, we have what I want from others, which we call relationship satisfaction. And box 4 is more to do with what I want for or from society, which we call community orientation. Now, these four boxes provide the framework in which we fit the 24 VbIM values, and they are summarized here in this way. You can see the names given to these 24 values, but to understand them, you would need to go into and understand the definition and the examples behind each of these. You may want to pause the video to reflect on what you think these labels mean, but they all then fit quite neatly with this four-box model, which we usually represent in this way. If you have completed the exercise described earlier, people will already have gone quite a way to identifying things that are important to them. So why would you then want to use the VbIM questionnaire? And there are 4 additional benefits as follows. First of all, you're asking them to answer 6 carefully chosen questions for each of the values, which is a far more reliable result than responding to single words and labels. Secondly, there are various response formats that allow inconsistencies to be identified in the way in which people answer, and this can then be used to challenge some of their pre-existing or socially desirable beliefs. You also have the fact that by summarizing what they say with numbers enables you to make useful comparisons with other people, which people always find very interesting. But finally, by doing the questionnaire, you get narrative reports, which makes the information more accessible and more usable. So let me tell you a bit more about the reports that come out of the VBIM. So the VBIM produces 3 reports, which are called the Explorer, the Challenge, and the Administrator report. But to use them well, it is important to understand how the VBIM is constructed. And the first issue, as with any questionnaire, but perhaps particularly with values questionnaires, is can we believe what people say? And this is not just an issue about honesty, it is also very dependent on self-awareness. So let me illustrate. Think of the people who occupy this place. Politicians are amongst the least trusted in our society, but many would espouse values. For example, I value integrity. And yet in the same breath, they might justify the cash for influence scandal, which occurred in 2010. And some of those even believe they've done nothing wrong. And so we can't always believe what people say. For this reason, VBIM identifies values in 3 different ways, allowing inconsistencies to be explored. To understand these 3 ways, look at how people expect to see the results of a psychometric profile. As a profile, often presented like this. Now, if we try to interpret this profile, what is it telling us? We can see that this person's wisdom score is the lowest. What does this mean? Let's try to understand it a bit better. So to understand it a bit better, take a piece of paper and using this rating scale 1 to 6, I would like you to rate the 7 statements which I'm going to show you below, and you should therefore pause the video while you do that. Again, I suggest that you pause the video whilst you score the questionnaire by adding all the ratings to the 7 questions, and this will give you your total score. And now I suggest that you pause the video again whilst you rank the values below A to I from most important as number 1 and least important as number 9. To scale the questionnaire, you will need to pause the video again. But firstly, locate where your total score, calculated earlier, is on the scale 8 to 36. You can now convert that to a typical norm score using the Sten scale 1 to 10. So for example, if you scored 22, then your scale score becomes 9. Let us now take the result from questionnaire 1, which we will call the appearance scale. We can assume that it is a subset of questions from a longer values questionnaire. See how we might typically present the results. And how might we interpret this? Is the appearance scale this person's most important value and wisdom the least? In fact, this cannot be concluded. To illustrate why, look back at your score for questionnaire 1, i.e. the appearance scale, and then see where you placed value F from questionnaire 2. Typically, when I run this exercise in even a small group, there is a fair range of scores for questionnaire 1 from about 10 to 30, and typically people who score high on questionnaire 1, the appearance scale, nevertheless rank value F very low. Hence you can get a high score as presented here, but it simply means that you have rated it higher than other people and not that it is particularly important to you. In fact, I would suggest that values questionnaires that simply present a normative profile, as shown here, are far too easily misunderstood. Since this is not always easy to understand, let me explain a little further. Consider the 2 values, wisdom and appearance. Let us assume that appearance is a relatively trivial value compared to wisdom. This means that people would typically rate the appearance statements lower, let's say 2, compared to the wisdom statements, let's say 3. And so the range of scores might look like this. Now, the normative profile shown earlier in effect assumes that the lower scores on one scale are equivalent to the higher scores on the other. In effect, the means are equated, and so the scales with a genuine lower score are given an uplift. This hides the underlying fact that appearance is a more trivial value. And VBIM also adds in the fact that the underlying differences are bound to be culturally influenced. VBIM uses a new and unique psychometric methodology to present a person with 3 different rankings based on the way they answered the questionnaire. This can expose certain inconsistencies, as shown here, and hence they challenge the person to search more deeply and to clarify what is really important to them. As a starting point, the general ranking is what a person is most likely to say when asked. The detailed ranking is likely to be more accurate since it uses all of the information the person has given when doing the questionnaire. And the comparative ranking is rather different. It describes how distinctive the person's answers in the questionnaire have been compared to the comparison group. And this comparison can also challenge a person to consider what they believe and about what is important to themselves. To see how this works in practice, let me show you a summary page which is in the administrator's report. It shows the rank order using the 3 methods, and as mentioned, the detailed ranking, the middle column, is based on the information from all 144 statements. In that column, some are shown in green and some in red. The green ones are those that have moved significantly up the scale, and the red ones are those that have moved significantly down the scale. This only appears in the administrator's report because it takes some explaining, but the way in which it is presented in the Explorer and the Challenge report is to show it in terms like this. The comparative column is also presented as a traditional normative profile, simply to show how distinctively the person has answered. But in addition, there's an option to use VBIM using the paired version. This is where a carefully chosen co-respondent is asked to provide feedback, and they answer the questionnaire describing how they see you. This overcomes one of the key criticisms of self-report, and it greatly increases a person's interest and curiosity in the whole process. The paired information is presented like this. Once again, the green and the red show where there are significant shifts in perception. There is also a normative comparison for both parties, as shown here. Building self-awareness necessarily involves some change in perception. This means sometimes challenging what people say or think about themselves, and we all have blind spots. VBIM has been designed to make a person curious about differences, and it uses a number of methods. Hence, there is the difference between VBIM's most likely view, using the detailed ranking, compared to the person's most likely narrative, using the general ranking. VBIM also offers additional ways to challenge by getting people to self-estimate, and then they can check their results against expectations, or seeing how someone else sees them, so feedback from some co-respondent using the paired process, or how distinctive they are compared to other people. Used well, these methods encourage people to find the real values that often lie hidden. What I have shown you are details in the administrator's report to help understand what VBIM is doing. However, one of the most useful processes to help an individual is captured in the Explorer report. People are first invited to consider the 4 major themes, because this is easier than considering 24 scales. And in this example, you can see that the person was scoring most highly in the personal development area. This can be a useful discussion and can be followed up with the more specific scales, as shown here on the next page. And this often helps to focus the discussion on the areas that are of most interest to the test taker. It is useful to recognize a kind of developmental progression underpinning the model as shown here. Young children are more likely to be focused on box 1, and as they enter their teenage years and early 20s, they are likely to shift to box 2. At some point, the focus can shift from self to others, which involves more of box 3, and perhaps some people develop a focus on box 4. This is like a maturity journey, and some see it as a leadership journey, where leaders become focused on others and their environment and their culture. However, there is a danger in viewing box 4 as the destination of maturity. I have met people who have a strong box 4 focus, those working in agencies such as UNHCR or the Red Cross, who are burnt out and have not paid enough attention to their box 1 needs. So it is unfair to regard box 4 as a goal. Each person needs to find the right balance between the boxes that fits their own personal psyche and their situation. It is also useful to monitor the kinds of reactions that people have when viewing their results. This can often be a journey of discovery, which I've classified as follows. Early in a review session, it is useful that the client recognizes and agrees with elements in the report. This is what I call affirmation. It helps to establish a credibility with the tool and engages the test taker. And another useful reaction is when the test taker sees something that clarifies or crystallizes something that they may not have been able to articulate clearly. This may come from the way certain values are defined. They are learning to articulate something that they sort of already knew, but they are gaining a better language to capture it. However, it gets more interesting when the test taker finds something they hadn't previously considered. They respond with curiosity and reflection. We are now pushing the boundaries of self-awareness and perhaps helping them to discover values that were unseen or even dormant. And finally, we have reactions where the test taker is perplexed or disagrees with elements of the report. The temptation can be to accept that the questionnaire can get it wrong. However, very often this is the gold dust, because this is where psychometrics add value by extending self-awareness. Let me explain that a little more. So it can be tempting when someone disagrees with the report to accept that they know best. However, VbIM is a development tool, and there is no development without change. This is why disagreements are the gold dust. They are an opportunity to challenge the pre-existing narrative and to explore anything that may be on the edge of awareness. To keep us on track, it is useful to remember that the process is one of exploration and not explanation. And discovering deeper values increases meaning through greater awareness and the choice then to live those values. So in summary, here is a way to help you to think about sequencing the process and of reviewing the results. And if you want, you can pause the video to consider it in more detail. And the purpose of all of this is to use VbIM to help people to build a more meaningful life. Let me remind you that when you use the VbIM, you have a choice of 3 reports. I would always recommend the administrator's report if you're a facilitator or coach, since it provides more detailed information for those initiated in the use of VbIM. If the report is to go straight to the test taker, I would recommend the Explorer report, which is easier for someone to manage on their own, although there is always value in these reports being facilitated. And the challenge report is when a facilitator or coach has enough knowledge of the test taker and they are prepared to explore surprises more quickly, because it is based on the less conscious hierarchy of values. And please don't forget that there is the paired process, which increases curiosity and engagement and does help to address one of the major limitations of self-report questionnaires. So let me leave you with one last message about why I use VbIM. It is one of the most significant psychometrics because of how it gets to the heart of a person's identity. It helps with the core thesis in Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And if you haven't read it, I thoroughly recommend it. But in the meantime, I hope this video has helped you to think about using the VbIM for its main purpose, to help a person to see the person that they want to be when they look in the mirror, and to then take some steps towards it. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more about VbIM or some of the other tools, please reach out using the details on the right of the screen. Thank you again for listening.